Hello and welcome back to my series on ecology. In part 3, we'll discuss the difference between climate and weather, then we'll look at the major biomes on the Earth's biosphere, and then finally we'll look at marine and freshwater ecosystems. Earth has 4 major connected systems, and if you know your Greek and Latin roots, you can figure out what they are. The biosphere, bio means life, so this encompasses all living things on Earth. Hydro means water, so the hydrosphere includes all the Earth's oceans, lakes, streams, and rivers, including the ice caps. Atmospheres, the root atmos means vapor or steam, so this means all the air that makes up the Earth's atmosphere, things like carbon dioxide, oxygen, and nitrogen. And finally, you have the lithosphere. Lithos means ground, so the lithosphere includes the Earth's crust, the rocks, the gravel, the sand, the mountains, and everything below Earth's surface. The biosphere is affected by climate and weather, and there's a difference between the two. Climate would be the long-term weather conditions of a region or an area, whereas weather just describes the day-to-day conditions. 4 key factors shape an area's climate. You have temperature, sunlight, water, and wind. The ocean, the atmosphere, and things on land can affect the Earth's climate, as well as extraterrestrial factors. Things like solar output, as well as interstellar dust, can affect the climate. Earth has 3 main climate zones, and we use temperature and precipitation to categorize each one. So you have the polar regions, which would include the North and the South Poles. You have the tropical regions, which is near the equator, and you have the temperate zones, which are in between the poles and the tropical belt. The tilt of the Earth's axis, as well as the curvature of the Earth, affects its climate. The equator receives most of the direct sunlight, and the curvature of the Earth causes uneven heating of the Earth, which leads to weather patterns and things such as ocean currents and convection currents. And finally, the tilt of the Earth's axis causes seasonal changes in both hemispheres. You can see that during the summertime, the northern hemisphere is pointed towards the sun, so it receives more sunlight during the summer. However, 6 months later, on the opposite side of its trajectory, during a 24-hour period, the axis is always pointed away from the sun. So during the wintertime, the northern hemisphere receives less sunlight. The rotation and uneven heating of the Earth's surface, as well as its masses of water, causes wind and ocean currents. This is because of convection currents that are created as warm air rises and cold air sinks. This leads to precipitation and all the weather patterns that we observe on Earth. Coastal areas tend to be surrounded by water. Water has a high specific heat, which means it absorbs a lot of energy before the temperature changes. This allows coastal areas to have a more stable climate. Mountains tend to have a very large effect on the climate. Something known as the orographic, or the rain shadow effect, is because mountains tend to block the passage of precipitation. So the windward side tends to have a lot more precipitation, things like snowfall and rainfall, whereas the leeward side, or the side away from the wind, tends to have a much more drier climate. The Earth has 6 major biomes, and we'll discuss each one. But each biome is characterized by the amount of rainfall and the temperature that it receives over the course of a year. Each biome has its own climatogram. It has a double Y-axis representing temperature and rainfall or precipitation, and it's pretty easy to read. So the drawn-in slope that you see on the climatogram would represent temperature, whereas the bars represent the precipitation over each month. A tropical rainforest biome is characterized by warm temperatures, abundant precipitation all year round, and lush forests. So you can see on that climatogram in the upper left, the temperature has that green line, so it's around 27 degrees Celsius, which works out roughly to 81 degrees Fahrenheit for you American students. And you can see in the blue bars that represents the amount of precipitation. So oddly enough, the precipitation actually is limited during the summer season. So during June, July, August, September, you can see how it drops below 100 millimeters. And in the map that's above my head, you can see that the tropical rainforests have that light green color, so most of the tropical rainforests are found near the equator. Next up, we have the Grassland Biome, and you can see in the map that's above me, anything that is colored orange means that it's a grassland, and all you see is grass. And you can see in the climatogram, the temperature will rise. It gets warmer during the summer months, and the temperatures are extremely cold during the winter. Now, the precipitation also correlates. It has a direct relationship with the temperatures. So there is more precipitation during the spring and summer months, as you can see in the blue bars. There's really no explanation needed for desert biomes. Everyone knows that it's arid, it's dry, there's very little rain or precipitation, and there's 4 types of deserts. You have your hot deserts, your semi-arid deserts, your coastal, and your cold deserts. And in the map that's above me, anything that is shaded brown means it's a desert biome. The temperate forests include deciduous forests, which means that you have trees that lose their leaves and the leaves change colors during the winter months. And you can see by the climatogram how the temperature and precipitation looks. During the summer months, you get more rain and it becomes warmer, which is obvious. And then during the winter months, you get less precipitation, months like January, February, and March, and the temperature is also a lot colder. The taiga is characterized by regions that have a lot of pine trees and conifers, and you can see in the map that's above me, it's the green color that you see, so it's mostly near the North Pole. And the temperature and the climate and the precipitation is characterized by warm summer months, followed with increased precipitation during the summer. And you can see that there's very little precipitation and lower temperatures during the fall and the winter months. Lastly, you have the tundras, which are in the far northern latitudes, so near the North Pole, like above the taiga biomes. And these are characterized by long winters. Usually they're like 10 months long, a lot of permafrost, okay, so ice caps and glaciers, and limited precipitation. And I just want to throw in this last detail here about minor biomes, things like chaparrals, and this is characteristic of California and how we're known for our wacky weather. So we have hot, dry summers in areas with desert climates, and then we also have cool, moist winters near the coastal regions and also like places like Yosemite. So California has a very diverse climate because of how the geography is laid out. We have coastal areas as well as inland areas which are drier. And last but not least, polar ice caps and mountains are not considered biomes. That's because there's no soil and you don't have a specific plant community. And these are found near the poles, so the North and South Pole. And most of these animals, things like polar bears, depend on seafood for resources and nourishment. Let's now discuss marine and saltwater ecosystems. So the ocean can be separated into 4 different zones depending on the distance and the depth. So there are 4 zones. You have your intertidal zone, Neritic zone, bathyal zone, and abyssal zone. And it really just describes their depth and their distance. So the most important one that we want to look at is probably the Neritic zone, which extends from the intertidal out to the edge of the continental shelf. So you have like your beach, and then you go out to a certain depth, and you have your open ocean, and it goes all the way down to the continental shelf. So that's what the Neritic zone is, and there is life in the Neritic zone. It's only 1/10 of the ocean, but it contains most of the biomass. So most of the biomass is really just plankton, which are tiny little critters that fish can feed on. So within the Neritic zones near coastal waters, you're going to see a lot of unique habitats, which you can find in coral reefs. Coral reefs are found in tropical zones, and there's a lot of diversity. There's a lot of different species of fish, things like tangs and clownfish, as well as corals and sea anemones, sharks, and eels. So these are found in the Neritic zone once again. Estuaries are really interesting because it's really just a mix of fresh and salt water, because if you think of it like this, remember when you go inland you get mountains, and the mountaintops might have snow, and the snow will thaw, and then it's going to cause fresh water to flow downwards into the river. But at the same time, you also have oceans which can flood inland, introducing salt into the environment and the ecosystem. Because of this interaction between the salt water and fresh water in these estuaries, you see really unique species, things like salmon, which start their life cycle in salty ocean water, and then they swim upstream to spawn in freshwater areas. Thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you learned a lot about climate and weather, the major biomes, as well as freshwater and marine ecosystems. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Wind Biology.